So you've had a doctor and a lawyer, and lucky you, you get another lawyer. Isn't this going to be fun? I have been doing this, this being patent law and patenting not only products of genetic material, patenting proteins, patenting drugs, patenting medical devices, patenting a lot of the products of scientific innovation that improve our lives for almost 24 years. And I can be held to that date because one of my law professors is sitting back there, and he knows exactly when I was sitting in his class. And he's probably going to grade me on this, so take it easy on me. I am a patent attorney, and want to try and put a little bit of the discussion that we've had here today into better perspective. The way that the issue was teed up, who owns your genes, is in and of itself sort of places the issue in the wrong context. The answer is very simple. Who owns your genes? You do. When I, as a patent attorney working with a scientist who works in the field of genetic engineering, goes to the patent office and asks for patent protection on a gene, I am not asking for patent protection for anything that is in any of our bodies. A gene as it exists in our bodies is a series of 4 chemicals tied together. Let's say you have a gene that makes, as they all do, it makes a particular protein. Proteins are what make up our bodies. They give us our bones, they give us our brains, they give us everything that our bodies do to function. And part of the goal of the development of many drugs is to beneficially affect how those proteins work in your body. A starting point for many of those drugs, many of you may be familiar with the concept of gene therapy. Starting point for many of the developments in therapeutic medicine may be that in our bodies something has gone awry. Maybe a mutation, such as the BRCA1 mutation or the BRCA2 mutation. Somehow something is not working in the way that it originally was intended to work, and that has led to us being at risk for the cause of disease. Now, as a scientist working in the field, what I want to do is I want to try and develop a drug that is going to either overcome that deficiency in your body or it's going to replace what is missing. So, for example, I work with gene therapy companies. Gene therapy, for example, for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, what that company wants to do is create a system in your brain to make a protein that is no longer being made in your brain so that your brain no longer functions as it should. Your nerve cells are dying. The amount of protein that would normally allow new nerve cells to grow or keep those alive are dying. And you would think, well, if I could come up with just that protein, if I could just replace that protein and put it into the brain, maybe I could keep those nerve cells from dying. Unfortunately, in many of our biological systems, just injecting a protein into the tissue is not an effective strategy because we have immune responses to it. The antibodies that were mentioned earlier in this evening react to it. They break it down, and it doesn't work in the way that the therapeutic approach had hoped it would. So what we do instead is we take genetic material. And I wouldn't really call this a gene, and I think this is a point of misunderstanding that we've touched on it, both of the prior speakers, but it's helpful to touch on it again here because I think it leads to a lot of concern over gene patents that really is not warranted by the reality. A gene, as it exists in your body, is those 4 chemicals that may go from here all the way to here. They're sitting on chromosomes in your cells. They're interacting with genes and other proteins and other parts of your cells and other parts of your chromosomes. There's a lot of things that go into making that gene work in your body the way that it's intended to do. When I want to patent a gene for purposes of making it into a drug or a diagnostic test, I'm only patenting this part out of that entire sequence. What I have done as a scientist is I have looked at that entire chromosome or that entire stretch of chemicals that makes up that gene, and I have determined it's this part that does what I need it to do when I put it into your body or I put it into a diagnostic test. This is the part that is sufficient to accomplish my gain. Now that chemical is a chemical like any other. It's a chemical like the chemicals in the lotions you put on your hands. It's a chemical like the chemicals in plants that we make other kinds of drugs out of. As a chemical, it's completely useless. It's just a piece of the gene as it exists in your body, but all of the other pieces that make the gene work the way it does in you aren't present in what I have gotten a patent on. So my goal as a scientist is to say, I can create a non-natural environment in which this gene will either give me information about a disease if I compare it to a gene from your body and the two don't match, or I have made a change to the piece of chemical that I have gotten the patent for and I compare it to your body and it has that change. It may tell me that you are at higher risk for breast cancer. Or, in the case of the gene therapy that I mentioned, I may take that gene and I may put it into a whole new machine, a virus that I can put into the body, and now it will escape the immune surveillance in my brain. It will go into my own cells, and it will make the protein that is missing that has led me to be at risk for Alzheimer's. Or I may have to take that little piece of chemical and put it into a piece of cellular structure like a bacteria so that the bacteria can provide all of the elements that are missing when I take that little piece of genetic material out of your body. You've kept all of the larger machinery. I now have to reproduce it. And what I do in a gene patent is I teach people this is the part that you need in order to make that protein, in order to identify that mutation that has relevance for breast cancer. This is that part of that chemical structure. But that's not enough. As you may know, in recent years, the entire human genome, the genome being the sequence of all of our genes on all of our 21 chromosomes, has been identified to the last of those 4 chemicals. That's not sufficient to get a patent. It never was. What you have to do is, in addition to identifying the one piece of a gene that is pertinent for your therapeutic aid and to make that protein or to identify that breast cancer mutation, you have to teach someone how to reproduce it in a way that's useful. So that there was an effort at one time when the Human Genome Project was completed for scientists who worked on that project to get patents to the entire human genome. I mean, after all, they did the work. They put in quite a bit of time and effort to determine where all of our genes are. And they're your genes, they're my genes. We all share the same genes. That effort was rejected. It was rejected on the basis that that really did come too close to patenting nature. What we patent when we patent genes is not that genetic material. It is the piece of genetic material. It is the discovery that that piece is important. It is the environment that I put that piece into that allows it to be useful, either as a drug or a diagnostic. Now, Kevin Keenan, I think rightfully said that the goal of the ACLU suit is to make the BRCA1 and 2 genetic mutation sequences or test that has been patented more available. Now, I have to correct one thing. It was not patented by Myriad Genetics. Myriad Genetics is a defendant. It was actually patented by researchers at the University of Utah. The test, there are 2 different sets of patents to that. One is to the test, one is to the genes. The gene patents cover anything useful that I can do with that piece of genetic material, bearing in mind that I, as the scientist, have determined how to make that useful. In the outside of your body, I have figured out what unnatural environment can I apply this gene to make it useful. That may be a drug in the case of the gene therapy, or it may be the sequence, but if I can't get a patent to that gene, if I'm only allowed to patent maybe methods of extracting the gene, which at this point are very well known, or I'm only allowed to patent particular products that I might be, or particular uses for that gene. And let me put this into perspective. In one case, one of the University of Utah Myriad genetic patent claims is to a method for screening for the BRCA1, BRCA2 mutations, and a method for diagnosing breast cancer based on the results of that screening test. If I say patenting the genetic material is unethical and wrong, and those patents just instantly went away, those method of use patents would potentially still exist. And all of the problems that have been identified with the way that this particular company commercializing that technology, Myriad Genetics, is using those patents would still exist. So the question of whether or not gene patents are something that we want to allow to continue doesn't necessarily resolve the issue that's been teed up by the ACLU. Another point is, I'm going to go back here one. So, why do we want to allow those scientists who did all that work to have these patents in the first place? I mean, wouldn't it really be better if the scientists were doing the work for the public good, and any company that was capable of commercializing this technology had the right to do so? Would that be better? Potentially, yes. Is that how the world works? No. This gives you a profile of what the average development cycle for a drug, whether it's from a gene, whether it's a chemical that I've isolated from a plant, whether it's something I made up in a test tube from scratch out of a eureka moment in my brain. This is how it goes through commercialization. There's the initial discovery, the eureka moment. Oh, this gene does this, and if we take it out, maybe we can make it do that. Sometimes that discovery phase is conducted at a university with public money. Sometimes it's not. If the public money does fund that initial discovery research, universities, which are not set up to commercialize technology themselves, must put it out into the commercial world for a company to take and develop the product further. And when they do that, they get paid back once the company actually makes a product. From that point, for a diagnostic test like the BRCA1 and 2 test, this is a little bit shorter pipeline, but they have to continue doing the testing. They have to figure out what that unnatural environment is that will make the gene useful outside of your body. They have to get approval for it by the Food and Drug Administration if they're using it as a drug, or in many cases as a diagnostic test. For example, the Food and Drug Administration keeps a very close eye on tests like the BRCA1 and 2 test and